The worst part about the video game industry is that it often burns the people who care about it the most. Publishers get the biggest fans to pay the most money for the most broken versions of games. They find ways to monetize their passion through DLC and so much more. But sometimes it can just feel like they're playing a cruel joke on you for daring to care at all. And with that in mind, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 video games that punish you for caring. Number 8, Call of Duty Warzone 2. Activision has missed a lot of open goals in their time, but in recent memory they haven't fumbled the bag quite as much as they did with Warzone 2. After launching the massively popular Battle Royale shooter in March 2020, Call of Duty was bigger than ever, with regular support, an addictive gameplay loop, and BR mechanics that limited the slow item management that the genre is known for, and prioritized action. Warzone 1 was an instant hit. The only issue was that it had to accommodate the yearly COD release schedule, which meant that with the releases of Black Ops Cold War and Vanguard, all of the weapons from those games had to be added to Warzone, as well as new themed maps and skins to pair the progression of all the experiences. This, combined with the arrival of next-gen machines, meant Warzone became bloated and unwieldy, so Warzone 2.0 was announced, a clean slate and new game that would be built from the ground up to facilitate this kind of long-term support. With a new map, new weapons, and next-gen features, it seemed as though Warzone 2 couldn't fail. And then it came out. In many respects, this new version felt more of a prototype than the original game did. With a new inventory backpack system, slower gameplay, and less fun looting, this was a more classical BR experience, losing the immediacy that made the predecessor such a joy to pick up and play. Warzone 2 admittedly is improving and has rolled back many of these features, but at launch it felt like fans of the original Warzone were being punished for enjoying its unique approach to the genre, and were instead given this basic PUBG clone and told to like it or lump it. Number 7, The Avengers. Look, I'm not here to tell you that Marvel's The Avengers was a disappointing game. You already know that, I already know that. The finished version of the title is not what actually lands it on this list, it's how it was treated post-launch. See, the reason that it punished players for caring is that the people who actually enjoyed the game at launch and stuck with it, hoping their time would be rewarded, were all ultimately lumped with a post-release content roadmap that did not live up to its potential. Over the years, Square Enix added a bunch of new characters and stories to the game, yes, from Black Panther to the Winter Soldier, but they were few and far between. The missions they added were often paltry too, while pre-release promises like PlayStation's Spider-Man DLC and character were just bare bones and arrived late. Now, all of this might have been excusable. I mean, it's certainly better than nothing if Square Enix didn't also try to squeeze the fan base for every penny along the way. From increasing the grind just arbitrarily to charging obscene amounts of money for skins and other microtransactions, it felt as though the publisher was fleecing the few people who actually gave the game the benefit of the doubt. Number 6, Guitar Hero Live. Guitar Hero Live, I bet that's not a name you've heard of in a long time. Well, back when the PS4 and Xbox One were the fresh new consoles on the market, the gaming industry decided that it was time to reignite some dormant franchises. So both Guitar Hero and Rock Band came back and attempted to win over fans like they did back in the day, to differing degrees of success. Guitar Hero Live, though, while being divisive with its live action concert presentation, did have a really cool idea. Rather than paying for individual tracks, it would instead keep things fresh by cycling between essentially different seasons of tracks. GHTV, as it was known, was designed around separate themed music channels that would add new songs regularly, allowing players to access them through, you guessed it, occasionally premium microtransactions. This feature added an insane number of songs to the game, but with it being a live service and all, it meant that they could be taken away at any moment. And when Guitar Hero Live bombed, Activision were quick to shut the servers down, which meant that players could only access the paltry 48 songs on disc, compared to the near 500 that were added to this live component. And because it didn't have regular song DLC where you bought and just downloaded it, it didn't matter if you had actually spent money to access those songs previously. Number 5, DMC Devil May Cry. When Capcom decided to reboot their beloved Devil May Cry series, they also chose to hand the reins over to a Western developer named Ninja Theory. There wasn't any real reason to get rid of the original developers, but at least Ninja Theory seemed like a safe pair of hands, having made the solid Heavenly Sword and beloved cult classic Enslaved Odyssey to the West. And for all of its faults, DMC is a great action game worthy of the series' name, but it's also something of a middle finger to series devotees. That's because this was a total reboot of the story and characters, with the beloved designs and personalities of the cool white-haired demon slayers Dante, Nero, and Virgil being, well, modernized. And these modernizations not only absolutely sucked the life out of the story, not helped by Dante now looking like a young Morrissey wannabe or something, but they also actively mocked the previous incarnations, with new Dante infamously quipping, "not in a million years," when donning a white wig evocative of the previous Dante's hairstyle. Again, DMC is a great action game, but this tone and approach made it clear that it wasn't a great Devil May Cry game, and burned fans who had invested in the franchise for so many years. Number 4, Mass Effect 3. Look, to be honest, there's no world where Mass Effect 3 doesn't end up being some degree of disappointing. BioWare set an extraordinarily high bar with Mass Effect 2, and the promise of all of your choices culminating in any number of ways for the final game was simply an unrealistic goal for the time. Hell, it's unrealistic now. But it's not just the ending that makes Mass Effect 3 disappointing, but a bunch of other changes that make it a slap in the face to people who made the RPG series such a success. And that's because it seemed as though EA and BioWare were embarrassed by the series' RPG roots in the first place. And so the depth was ripped out of this third game. Conversations now had a limited amount of dialogue options, where sometimes Shepard would just speak without any input from the player at all. Character building was minimized, and side missions only really amounted to increasing a number that decided how many allies you'd have at the end of the game. I still think overall Mass Effect 3 is a good game, but it's certainly not a good RPG. And that's a real punishment for players who jumped in on game 1, expecting those RPG mechanics to only grow, not shrink, like they did. Number 3, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. In most senses, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is an amazing game, perhaps the best stealth action game of all time, no joke. From the large, well-crafted maps offering tons of creative freedom for players to complete objectives, to stealing equipment and personnel with the silly but satisfying full-time recovery system, and that killer soundtrack, it is a total dream to play. However, people weren't primarily playing MGS5 for its gameplay. No, they were playing because this was the last Metal Gear game, period. The finale in a decade-spanning franchise that, going off the trailers, promised to bring together the prequel timeline and the present-day timeline together and finally bridge that gap. And ultimately, that just isn't what the game is at all. Promised to be a missing link in the marketing, MGS5's story ultimately raised more questions than it answered, leaving fans feeling an overall lack of completion and cohesion, a phantom pain, if you will. However, you can't really blame the developers on this one though, as publisher Konami and game director Hideo Kojima famously fell out on the project, leaving many to assume that it was just rushed out unfinished, which is definitely evident by the lack of content in the second half. Overall, it's just a big shame. Number 2, Assassin's Creed 3. After building up the modern-day story of Desmond, explored through the genetic memories of his ancestors, Assassin's Creed 3, well, kinda decided to mess it up right at the final hurdle. With the original writer out, many questions remained unanswered going into the third game. Desmond's identity, scheming god Minerva, closest ally Lucy's betrayal, and what about that whole thing with Adam and Eve that we glimpsed in AC2? It's kind of never answered. Well, Ubisoft themselves seemed uninterested in tying any of these threads together, and so instead, we got a cliche story about Desmond sacrificing himself to prevent a solar flare from destroying the world. An assassin messiah whose growth and importance to the overarching plot of the Ancients is simply dropped along with his body. And the so-called Apple artifact at the center of the story was quickly reduced to one of many similar magical artifacts, probably the worst one in fact, thanks to the power creep that has grown over so many games. The ending of AC Valhalla finally gets back around to this story, albeit in a convoluted way but hopefully they can actually stick with it this time. Number 1, Halo Infinite. How did it come to this? 343 Studios' Halo trilogy was not the grand return for the franchise that Microsoft wanted, even if it did start pretty strong. No, instead the company has burned the people who cared the most at pretty much every turn. Die-hard fans of the game who couldn't wait to play every title in the series in one handy package, well, screw you, the Master Chief Collection was broken at launch. Are you interested in the story set up by the trailers for Halo 5? Well, screw you again, because the actual game is going to be nothing like what was presented there. With these two disasters in mind, it should have been no surprise that Halo Infinite, Microsoft's envisioned 10-year platform for the series going forward, was just as disappointing. But again, the hope was there. I mean, surely 343 couldn't mess up for a third time, and with a last-minute delay, returning Halo veterans, and a perceived commitment to get it right, maybe they finally had learned their lesson. Oh, how wrong we were. While Halo Infinite definitely had its charms and rock-solid multiplayer, the hardcore fans started getting burned fast. The promised split-screen co-op campaign that was 80% complete, cancelled. Forge? Delayed. New seasons of content? So few and far between, it was a joke. While it started well enough, the lack of content for Infinite burned those dedicated fans who actually gave it a chance and committed to it at launch, and it doesn't look like there's going to be any salvation anytime soon. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Did you get burned by these games like so many did? And are there any other ones you wish you didn't put your faith in? Let me know, and while you're down there, if you could, please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.